Welcome to a pivotal moment in the world of broadcast as we proudly present the Men's Mental Health Show featuring the renowned Larry Mabry in collaboration with the Maassen Group. This essential exploration of men's mental health wouldn't be possible without the invaluable support of RainerAvenueRadio.world. Now, let's dive into this crucial conversation with Larry Mabry and the Maassen Group. Your mental well-being matters. Here's Larry Mabry.
Hey, what's up? What's up? We got this June 30th, 2025, this nice hot Monday, blazing Monday. So just want to say what's up? What's up? Today, we're going to look at boundaries for men, why saying no is a form of self-respect. Boundaries for men, why saying no is a form of self-respect. So let's talk about it a little bit. So real quick, have you ever said something, you said yes to something and immediately regretted it? It takes your boundary. That's basically your boundary that basically is kind of whispering or screaming at you that, man, something just didn't feel right. So today we're going to explore that. So first of all, let's define what boundaries are, because, a lot of times I have sessions with my clients and I talk about boundaries and it sounds beautiful when you say it fast, right? But let's define, right? We're talking about delineated boundaries. So the first boundary we're talking about is the emotional boundary, right? Setting the line in the sand as far as those individuals that's not respecting your emotions. Really, really important. The second boundary I want to talk about today is the physical boundary. So that's like if somebody come in your personal space, people invade your space, right? You have a certain space that you like people to adhere to. That's important too, right? Setting boundaries with your personal space. The third thing that's really important is mental boundary, right? Because sometimes people you interact with can be a bit much and really weighing on your mental priorities. And so it's important to set boundaries with your mental space or mental health. And the last one I want to talk about too, that people don't really take or they don't really prioritize, is the time-based boundary. Very important. Time-based. And I want to talk about that today because, we only have a limited amount of time here on this planet. And sometimes people, based on their ego or, whatever planet they're living in, they don't really honor your time, right? And so, and it's not always a transactional thing where you're exchanging time for money. It could be offering support, offering help. But, it's important that you establish boundaries with people so that they understand. Boundaries are not about controlling others. They're about protecting your peace. Let me say that again. Boundaries are not about controlling others. They're about protecting your peace. Very, very important. Your mental space, your peace, it allows you the energy to function, to be able to cope and handle a set amount of tasks. So it's very important to make sure that you have that secured. So let me give you an example. So let's say you don't answer your work emails after 7 o'clock. That would be like a time boundary, right? And I want to give an example. So I know a lot of times when I meet with clients, sometimes, we have hourly sessions and it may start at one time and we may kind of go a little bit further. I would say when I first started, I would go a little bit more over that time. Lately, I've been a little bit more intentional about that. And let me say why that's important. See, if you don't actually draw the line and say, hey, you know what, it's time for me to shut this down. What do you think that communicates to the people that you are serving? Well, one, they may think, oh, that's cool. But then two, because you're not really respecting your time, do you really think they're going to respect your time? I think not. And so at first I thought, oh, it's rude. But as, you live a little longer, you realize, look, I need to kind of honor this boundary and kind of separate this time so that people can show a little bit more respect. But at the same time, when you do this more often, people tend to respect you more. And by doing that, you're not being lazy, you're just being intentional. Because a lot of times people think, oh, you need to work harder, right? That's the old paradigm. And so let's talk a little bit about, why do men struggle with boundaries? Well, I'm gonna break it down. Sometimes there's cultural conditioning. We're the provider, we have to be the provider of the household. People may say, don't be selfish. Real men don't complain. I know growing up in my household, and I would even say it to this situation now, like, I don't really complain, right? I'm more like, okay, just get her done. However, if I'm feeling some kind of way, I may want to express that, right? Raise your hand if you've been in that situation, right? Maybe you just really want to express it, but you don't want to seem like, you are uh over being overzealous, or coming out of pocket, or sounding like the pregnant female dog situation. I want to put that out in the air, but you don't want to come off like you're being too much. However, it's really, really important to let people know your boundaries and draw the line. Otherwise, people will just keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. So it's very important to make sure you do that. And sometimes we do that because of fear of rejection, right? We don't want to be seen as weak. Um, I'll give you an example. So grant a man agrees to help a friend move every weekend, but even though he's exhausted, he may have had a rough week, right? I mean, you've been putting in those 40, 60, 70 hours. And your boy's like, yo, you got me? And you like, sure. And you go over there and he had that old school, 1958 TV that's like 300 pounds. You like, bro, the brother didn't bring a dolly or nothing. You like, come on, bro. Are you serious? But because men like to be honorable and that of our word, so we go through there. But it's like, man, you know what I'm saying? And then afterwards, you just like, man, I should have told my man, you end up jacking up a hamstring or something like that, and you just looking crazy. But you fear saying no because it'll make you look unreliable or make you look weak, But I want to give you some ways to reframe that. By reframing, come at it from a different perspective. You could say, if you say something like, you know what, let's table this right now. We'll kind of get back to that a little bit later. They may say some things, but at the end of the day, if you don't honor yourself, who's going to honor you, right? Saying no is a sign of self-respect, not selfishness. Let me say it again. Saying no is a sign of self-respect, not selfishness. Another one I'll talk about is the emotional boundaries we mentioned earlier. Anger is often a signal of a boundary violation. So if you're noticing you're feeling some kind of way, typically it's because someone has crossed your boundaries. So for example, you feel resentment when your partner makes plans for you without asking. That's a cue to speak up and say, hey, you know what? I appreciate you. And I like to kind of talk to people about like the strategy as far as how to handle that. You want to honor people's actions, right? And say, hey, you know what? I appreciate you looking out and thinking about me in this situation. However, moving forward, could you let me know a little bit ahead of time so that way I can make the necessary provisions on my end? And so that's important because that's going to help you communicate that situation. But also, one strategy I recommend too is using I feel statements. That way you're not pointing a finger at nobody. You're just telling them how you feel. So you can say something like this: I feel overwhelmed when plans are made without checking in. I need to be part of those decisions, right? Or you could say something like, you know what? I'm feeling uncomfortable with this situation right now. Please let me know moving forward. Or something to the effect of, I just need to know so I can I feel more comfortable with these particular choices that we're making in the household or in the organization or business and that type of thing. Okay. And at first it's going to feel uncomfortable. You have to kind of practice those types of skill sets, but that's why we're here, right? So we can work through that. So another boundary is in relationships. The love does not equal obligation. Dun, 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 dun. Really important. So sometimes we have emotional enmeshment when your identity is tied to someone else's needs. Let's talk about that. As men, a lot of times, our value sometimes gets enmeshed in the person that we are taking care of. And we have to really, really draw the line, that boundary, right? A man feels guilty for not texting his partner back immediately, even during work hours. And sometimes this is tough because, the individual that you're having a relationship with, they may be hitting you up and putting the pressure on. Hey, why do you hit me up? Hey, why don't you handle this? Why? And what happens is, after a period of time, we kind of build up this response type mechanism where we're not really, I would say we're kind of desensitized. We're always looking at our phone, and that way we can't really put our energy into the things we really need to take care of because of that guilt, or feeling like, hey, we need to make sure we make that person happy. A way to reframe that would say, being available 24/7 isn't love, it's emotional overextension, right? You're overextending yourself. And it's funny because I have friends I've known since I've been 15 years old. I'm 53 now. And it's like, if they hit me up in the pinch, I got them, right? But we don't need to talk all the time. Like, because of the depth of the friendship, it's like, yo, if you need me, I got you, and vice versa. And so it's important to make sure that there's boundaries with that emotional, and you're not overextending yourself, right? And think about it in terms of energy, right? As you overextend for a period of time, basically you'll have like some sort of hyperextension, right? Think about that in terms of your emotional energy. So you want to make sure you kind of preserve that energy. All right. So set expectations early. I care about you, and I also need uninterrupted time to focus. Very, very important. So that lets people know, hey, while I'm working, handling this, I really don't want you to bother me during this time. Or hey, text and I'll respond a little bit later. See, there's ways to have a little bit of gray area, but you want to make sure people are honoring your boundaries. Okay. Boundaries at work. That's important because if you work too hard, basically you can get burnout, and you want to transition from burnout to balance. So overworking to provide or prove worth or avoid conflict. Yeah, a lot of my clients have that, overachieving. You may have that spouse or that significant other that could be a little mouthy, a little sensitive. And you say, you know what, I might as well go ahead and put in these extra hours rather than go ahead and deal with that, right? Raise your hand if you've been there. So you're asked to stay late again. You say yes, but inside you're seething, right? You're like, dang, right? So I'm give you another perspective. So one strategy: I'm committed to doing great work, and I also need to protect my energy. I can't stay late tonight, but I'll prioritize this first thing in the morning. Really important to communicate that. Okay. Let's talk about some other things. We'll look at some scripts for setting boundaries. So practical phrases: I'm not available right now, or I'm not available for that right now. Okay. So somebody may say, hey, could you handle that? You know what? I'm not available for that right now. Because sometimes people want you to do it like in that moment. Growing up with two sisters and a very aggressive mother, when mom would come in and say, clean that room, she typically wasn't talking about next week, So it was like, yo, handle that right now, stat. And that doesn't mean that, you disrespect mom or disrespect your significant other. However, it's important to communicate your boundaries. Say, hey, and it's really weird because you may be sitting there, like maybe playing a game or maybe getting your thoughts together. And from the person looking at you, they may say, oh, you're not doing nothing, right? But it doesn't matter. If you feel like, hey, in this moment I'm processing something, they don't know what information that you have in your head. They don't know if you're resting. They don't know if you came home from work and you're just tired, you just need to chill or whatever. But it's important to practice, right? Another phrase you could say is, let me get back to you after I check my schedule. I use that quite often. That doesn't work for me. It's a nice one. But yeah, let me get back to you after check my schedule. It's really, really popular. Well, that's one I use. So let's look at a role play example. So friend asks for money. You say, hey, I care about you, but I'm not in a position to lend you money right now. You don't owe them a long explanation. It's important to have clarity. Clarity is kindness. And sometimes we give and give and give at the expense of ourselves. And I want us to think about giving as a form of energy. So it's important to have balance with that. And it has to be reciprocated, right? If you're giving and giving and giving and it's not being reciprocated, what happens? You get exhausted, right? Imagine if you go to your job, and it doesn't matter if you're making millions of dollars, right? If you go to your job and you show up with all that energy and you don't get the payment, you're going to feel some kind of way, right? Think about that in terms of the energy that you give out to people. So if you're constantly giving and giving and giving and it's not being reciprocated, then it's going to drain you. So it's just important to make sure that you communicate your needs, and show that you have those boundaries. All right. So now we're going to look at what we call a self-check, right? So you're going to ask yourself, where do I feel drained? So if you're noticing that you're feeling drained, you got to ask yourself, okay, why am I feeling drained? Right? Who do I feel resentful toward? Right? So if you notice certain relationships, you're feeling a little bit resentful towards a certain person, ask yourself, okay, why am I feeling resentful towards that person? What do I keep saying, or what do I keep saying yes to, and what can I say no to? That's important. A lot of my clients, sometimes they just don't know how to say no, right? And so I would argue it's important to set boundaries and practice it. Now, in the beginning, if you haven't done it, it's going to feel weird. You're going to feel some kind of way and say, man, I don't feel comfortable with this. But you'll notice as you start practicing these particular strategies, you'll start feeling good. You'll start feeling a little bit more rejuvenated. You'll have a little bit more energy. And you'll see the world from a totally different point of view, right? And so what would my life look like if I honored my limits without guilt? Let's talk about that. Because sometimes, the guilt is something that we use that drives us down a particular slippery slope. But if you can have everything that you wanted and money wasn't an issue, how would you live your life, right? How would you be authentic? What would it look like? Very, very important. Let's talk about that. Okay. So we're going to recap a couple things. So boundaries are a form of self-respect, not rejection. That means that you're showing respect towards yourself. I like to say by self, we're talking about our inner self, our inner child. And a lot of times we have these relationships with people or relationships in our world based on the trauma that we've experienced with our inner child. And so as we set up these boundaries, we start to form respect, not rejection. We encourage listeners to set one small boundary this week. So for you guys, I want you to set one small boundary this week. So if you're noticing that, hey, you know what? I like to eat 2 cheeseburgers, then cut it down to 1 cheeseburger, right? Or if you're noticing that you're not really saying no to people, practice saying no. And yes, it's going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to feel some kind of way, but that's okay. I want you to push through it, because what you're going to do is you're going to start honoring your inner child, but you have to practice that. If you don't take care of your inner child, who's going to do it, right? And so make sure you start practicing that. What boundary are you working on? Okay, so I want you guys to shoot me. If you guys are on Instagram, let me know, what boundary are you working on? If you want to share your story, feel free to reach out and say, hey, I'm working on this boundary. You guys feel like, you know what, I would like to have more information to help me kind of work with this particular boundary. Really, really important. Okay. In full disclosure, I like to kind of talk about something I'm working on right now. So the biggest thing that I've been working on for myself is, because I'm a business owner, I have a lot of contracts. I kind of work with different people. I've been really working on boundaries for self-care, right? So I've been going for more hikes, more walks, been kind of handling that. Got a bike, was thinking about electrical bike. If anyone has one, let me know what you think is the best one. But just moving more movement, because a lot of times I'm in front of my clients, and really getting myself out there. And I would say in the past, I would think about it, but not really do it. And now I'm at a point where I was like, I had a long conversation with my mom, and, like I said, for those people that listened in a while back, my stepdad had passed away back in September. And, my mom and I just had real conversation. She's like, yo, take care of your health. And I said, that's a good point. And so I thought to myself, what is there one thing I can do every day? And I've been doing that, and that's been walking, seeing the beautiful things out here in Washington with all these lakes and parks and cool things. So I've been really being more adamant about enjoying the beautiful splendor of Washington, right? And so been going on hikes and walks and that's always been awesome. And I'm never tired of that. And so, but I had to kind of set boundaries even with myself, right? And so I'm sharing that from my own personal experience. It's gonna feel uncomfortable. It's okay. But the cool thing is once you do something consistently, what happens, it becomes a habit, right? And then I basically have someone that kind of holds me accountable on the iPhone. If you have an iPhone, there's a fitness app. I kind of connected with some friends. You can send an invite, and you basically can say, hey, I'm going to burn X amount of calories. I'm going to do these tasks every day. And I just kind of check in with friends, and we kind of motivate each other. That's another motivator too, right? So find somebody who can hold you accountable, right? They're not judging you. They're kind of supporting you, right? But you're setting that boundary, you're setting that focus, and you should start noticing some pretty cool things. And I would say the one thing I'm noticing with myself with that boundary is I'm more clear-minded. I would also say that spending some time in nature, it kind of gives you a little bit more grounding. In fact, one of my clients brought up a really good idea, and I want to see what you guys thought about it. He's like, bro, have you ever thought about having retreats? And I'm like, you know what? It's funny you should say that. I was actually thinking about that. So I'm thinking about starting some retreats here in Washington. It could be for some people here or people all over the states or different states. I think it's a cool opportunity because Washington, I mean, there's like 3,000 accessible waterfalls here. I mean, we got water, we got lakes, we got the sound, we got mountains, we got hikes, we got greenery. I mean, they call it the evergreen state because pretty much anything that falls in the ground pretty much can grow, right? But that also means you as well. It just depends on which soil that you plant yourself in. So just wanted to kind of put that out there. So just being mindful of the boundaries and just staying focused, right? So next week, we're going to be diving into how boundaries with your families, how to handle those boundaries with your families without burning bridges. Really, really important, right? And that's something I've talked to quite a few of my clients about, looking into that. And also, too, for those people that like to tune in, make sure you guys show some love for my the next person will be coming on at 6. Dr. Tracy Harrell. Make sure you guys show her some love. She'll be on the show Better Together and Living Powerfully. I'm hoping that one day we can kind of connect. I know we talk quite a bit. But what are you doing as far as showing boundaries within your life, right? How are you living powerfully with your boundaries? So be mindful of that as you guys tune in to Dr. Tracy Harrell. Okay. Also, too, just want to kind of shout back out to you guys. Feel free to shout out. Thanks again. I saw a little person shoot me a little heart. Thank you so much. What are some things you guys can reach out to me at the Maassen Group 1 at Gmail? What are some things that you think that were really powerful that you took away from the boundaries we talked about today? Do you think this was beneficial? Right? Are you noticing within your own life some boundaries that you're setting that you're noticing that's becoming effective? Right? Another thing too, as far as the boundaries, because a lot of times, we can talk about boundaries really easy, but going back to the emotional part, right? Are you honoring your own emotional needs? And you got to communicate that to people. Say, hey, you know what? I'm feeling this kind of way when you share this with me. As you interact with me, could you be a little bit more mindful of that, or lower your voice and that type of thing? Really important. And in the beginning that may be a challenge, so what I recommend is you get like a phone or you get a notebook and write them down, right? Because sometimes when you're around people and you're trying to establish those boundaries based on maybe they're too loud or they're too aggressive, you may not feel comfortable. So I would suggest in your own private area, write down your thoughts, express yourself. And it may go something like this. Using that I feel statement, you may say something like, hey, I feel this way when you do this, right? Or I feel this way when you raise your voice. I would appreciate moving forward that, you're a little bit more mindful of my feelings when you're expressing yourself, right? That's important. And you may need to practice crafting that out first before you communicate that to person. Because that's going to allow you to feel comfortable with your voice. But at the same time, as you express that from your heart, hopefully that individual, they'll have some sort of understanding, kind of meet you somewhere, right? Or if you notice that they're really aggressive and they don't have the wherewithal to do that, then you might need to kind of relinquish yourself from that space, or just say, hey, you know what? When you're able to speak kindly to me or listen to what I have to share, then we can have an interaction, right? And so one other thing too I want to talk about too that can be tough, because sometimes, and this has happened to me, sometimes you interact with an individual, and no matter which way you share with them, they're not receptive, they're not listening, they're not respectful, nothing. I would say only in those instances when you've tried everything that you can communicate. You may have had, someone like myself to support. You may have talked to them through another person. You may have communicated in different ways. But if that individual is not open and receptive, then at that point, then I would just relinquish yourself from that conversation, right? You could try to write it down and that type of thing. But eventually, hopefully, that individual will understand without you being in their space. But at the end of the day, it's important that you have the proper love and boundary within yourself. And by you basically relinquishing your energy from that individual, hopefully they'll get that understanding, right? Through your actions. Okay. All right, guys. Just want to say appreciate you guys tuning in. Appreciate the love you guys have been giving us. Feel free to reach out next week where we'll be talking more about the boundaries, how to hold boundaries with our family without the burning bridges, as well as looking at family members and different coworkers and that type of thing. And don't forget, we'll see you guys next week. Without further ado, peace.